Every major event in human history, from the discovery of fire, to the fall of empires, to the creation of YouTube itself, happened on something surprisingly fragile. A spinning rock. A rock with a molten core, wrapped in a thin, unstable atmosphere, orbiting a massive burning star. And here's the part most people ignore. If that star's activity drops by just 0.5%, the global temperature on Earth can fall by 2 degrees. That might not sound like much. But what if I told you? Those 2 degrees once caused famine, war, mass migration, and the collapse of entire societies. This is the story of the Little Ice Age, and how a slight shift in climate quietly reshaped human history. Before the year 1300, the world was actually going through something very different. Historians call it the medieval warm period. Crops were abundant. Populations were booming. Life, in many regions, was relatively stable. In Europe, harvests were strong enough to support rapid population growth. In England, something almost unthinkable today, people were even growing grapes and exporting wine to France. Yes, England, wine exporter. Meanwhile, melting ice allowed Norse settlers to expand into Iceland and Greenland. Entire new settlements appeared where ice once dominated. But not everything was perfect. In Central America, this warming brought devastating droughts, contributing to the collapse of the Maya civilization. Still, overall, the world was warmer, more predictable. And then, everything changed. Around the early 1300s, temperatures began to drop. Not dramatically at first, just enough to disrupt everything. In 1303, the Baltic Sea froze. Weather across northern Europe became unstable and unpredictable. Then, in 1315, relentless rain began. And it didn't stop. Fields turned into swamps. Crops rotted before they could be harvested. Stored grain spoiled. Yields dropped to 1/3. Sometimes, even 1/4 of normal production. Food became so scarce that even the King of England couldn't buy bread. Think about that. If the king can't get food, what chance do ordinary people have? And it only got worse. Livestock began to die. Hay rotted in the fields, leaving animals with nothing to eat. Cold and disease spread through herds. Farmers brought animals inside their homes just to keep them alive. Entire industries collapsed. England stopped producing wine. Wool production dropped because sheep would freeze to death after being sheared. Even salt production was disrupted, meaning people couldn't preserve meat. And when food runs out, people do things they never thought they would. They ate dogs, cats, bird eggs, and eventually, even other humans. This period became known as the Great Famine of 1315. Entire villages disappeared. Families abandoned their homes, or worse. Some sold their children. Others ate them. And this wasn't a short crisis. It lasted for years. In some regions, agriculture didn't recover for over a decade. At the time, people didn't understand climate systems. They looked for answers elsewhere. Many believed this was divine punishment. In England, people blamed King Edward II. And in a way, they weren't entirely wrong. Failed policies, wars, and poor leadership made everything worse. Eventually, he was overthrown and killed in 1327. But the real cause was something far bigger than any king. And then came something even deadlier. As famine weakened populations, immune systems collapsed. And in 1347, the Black Death arrived. One theory suggests that climate change triggered mass migrations across Eurasia, helping spread the plague. Cold, damp conditions forced people indoors, into close contact. Perfect conditions for disease. In colder regions, mortality rates were twice as high as in warmer areas like the Middle East. Millions died. Not because of war, not because of politics, but because the climate shifted just enough. And in some places, the effects were even more final. Take the Norse colonies in Greenland, founded around the year 985. At first, they thrived. But as temperatures dropped, sea ice returned. Winters became harsher. Storms intensified. Trade routes collapsed. And their main export, walrus ivory, lost value after Europeans discovered African elephant ivory. By the early 1400s, they were gone. Completely. The last record we have is a wedding in 1408. After that, silence. Meanwhile, the ocean itself was changing. Cod, one of the most important food sources in Europe, began migrating. It prefers specific temperatures. And as waters cooled, cod moved farther into the Atlantic. Fishermen followed. Further and further, until they reached the coast of North America. In 1602, explorers found massive cod populations near what we now call Cape Cod, a place named after fish. But even in this new world, climate struck again. Colonists arriving in North America faced brutal, unfamiliar conditions. Heavy snow, frequent droughts, violent Atlantic storms. They assumed this was normal. But it wasn't. They had arrived during one of the most unstable climate periods in recent history. Now you might be wondering, if this was a global event, why do we hear mostly about Europe? That's actually still debated. Some researchers argue the Little Ice Age was mainly a North Atlantic phenomenon. Others say it affected the entire world. There's evidence of climate disruption in China, the Ottoman Empire, New Zealand, South America, and the Pacific Islands. Droughts, floods, falling sea levels, the effects were everywhere. But in Europe, the consequences took a darker turn. As weather became more unpredictable, fear spread. People needed someone to blame. And they found it. Witches. In 1487, a book called Malleus Maleficarum, The Hammer of Witches, claimed that witches could control the weather. Storms, frosts, crop failures, all blamed on individuals. This book became a manual for witch hunts. It even described how to torture people into confessing. Thousands were executed, not because they controlled the weather, but because people needed an explanation. In 1645, in the French Alps, a bishop performed a ritual. A massive glacier was advancing toward a village, destroying crops and threatening homes. So he blessed it with holy water, hoping to stop it. This wasn't unusual. It was a normal response in a world that didn't understand what was happening. The 17th century became the coldest period of all, and disasters stacked on top of each other. A volcanic eruption in Peru in 1600 made temperatures drop even further. This contributed to famine in Russia, helping trigger the time of troubles. Snow fell in subtropical China. Floods destroyed cities in Spain. The Bosporus Strait froze. The Thames River in London froze solid. Europe was caught in a cycle. Drought, flood, early winters, again and again. And then came 1816, the coldest year of all. The year without a summer. The cause? The largest volcanic eruption in recorded history. Mount Tambora, Indonesia, 1815. Ash spread across the globe, blocking sunlight. Temperatures dropped. In the United States, snow fell in June. Crops failed. Food prices skyrocketed. People reported birds freezing mid-flight and falling from the sky. Imagine that. Birds freezing in the air. And yet, humanity didn't collapse. It adapted. In the Netherlands, people built massive systems of dams and windmills. They turned water management into an engineering art. Instead of relying on farming, they built a trade-based economy. They imported food and became incredibly wealthy. This became the Dutch Golden Age. In England, land was reorganized. Small farms were merged into large, efficient ones. New crops were introduced. Agriculture became more resilient. But there was a cost. Millions of peasants lost access to land. They moved to cities, becoming the first wave of the modern working class. Poverty, as we know it today, was born. In France, reforms didn't happen. Farms became smaller and less efficient. People resisted new crops like potatoes. And when famine returned, it hit hard. So hard, it helped set the stage for revolution. Even daily life changed. Homes were redesigned. Open fires were replaced with stoves and chimneys. Heating became more efficient. People even began to romanticize winter. Snowy landscapes. Winter festivals. Turning survival into culture. But not all adaptations were humane. In Japan, during extreme famine, authorities ordered the halt of non-essential food production. And in one province, they killed all children under the age of 7 to reduce population. That's how severe it became. So what caused the Little Ice Age? There's no single answer. It was likely a combination of factors. Reduced solar activity, changes in ocean currents, increased volcanic eruptions. Each one amplified the others, creating a feedback loop of cooling. And then, around 1850, the climate began to warm again, partly naturally, but also because of something new. Human activity, deforestation, industrial pollution, the beginning of man-made climate change. And now, we are heading in the opposite direction. Not toward a world without summer, but possibly a world without winter. By the end of this century, temperatures could rise by 2.5 to 3 degrees. The same scale of change that once caused famine, collapse, and chaos. And in the Alps, the descendants of those who once prayed for glaciers to stop advancing are now praying for them to stop melting. History didn't just happen. It was shaped by forces we couldn't see, and maybe still don't fully understand.